Well, Rishi Sunak is Chief Secretary to the Treasury, basically in charge of spending all of the money and a rising star in the Boris Johnson government. Welcome, Rishi Sunak.
Good morning.
You were listening, I'm sure, to Nigel Farage there. You were standing just beside him, so you must have been listening to him. He says he is going to contest 600 seats or so in this general election, which suggests to me that calling the election may be looking like a terrible, terrible mistake.
Well, first of all, it was not an election that we wanted to call. It's something that we were forced to do because of Parliament's inability to make a decision on Brexit. But I'd take a step back. This election provides, I think, a real choice for people watching between real change on the one hand and more of the same on the other. With a majority Conservative government, you're going to have the certainty that Brexit can be done in a matter of weeks with this new deal that the Prime Minister's negotiated, and then we can move on to focusing on the priorities that the people want us to, that impact their day-to-day lives, whether that's getting to see your GP, safe communities, good job that pays well. The alternative is a vote for anybody else, including Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party, just is going to lead to more delay, more confusion, running rings, talking about Brexit for months and months on end, and not getting the focus on what people want. That's the choice.
I suppose my point is all of that is based on if the Conservatives win a big majority, or a good majority, or working majority, and if the Brexit Party stands in 600 seats and mops up a good chunk of the pro-Brexit vote, then you're not going to get anywhere near that. You're going to have another hung parliament. It'll be another Conservative early election victory, early election campaign, which turns out to be a total disaster.
Well, I think that's why it's important that people watching and people, when they engage in this campaign, realise that the only way to end this uncertainty, to end this indecision and move on to focus on what they want is to vote for a majority Conservative government that, yes, is going to get Brexit done in a matter of weeks, but also has got an exciting and inclusive agenda, focusing on what they care about, whether it's the NHS, whether it's schools, whether it's safer communities and a strong economy. That's what people want to get us back onto. We can only do that with a Conservative government that gets Brexit done and we can move on. No one else can promise that.
Do you think as a party there's anything you can offer Nigel Farage at this stage?
I don't think we're interested in offering anything. What I would say is Nigel has spent his entire career fighting for Brexit. The Prime Minister's now negotiated what I think is a very good Brexit deal.
He says it's not Brexit at all.
Well, I campaigned for leave. I've spent a lot of time talking to my constituents and others across the North East, as he mentioned, and in Yorkshire. What do they want from Brexit? They want to end free movement and replace it with a point system. Just hang on 1 second. This is important. They want to end the fact that money keeps going to the EU year after year. They want to make sure we're in control of our laws. And also they want us to have an independent trade policy. Those are all things that the Prime Minister's deal delivered. So what I'd say to Nigel Farage is sometimes in politics, as in life, you've got to take yes for an answer.
But what do you say to him when he says, for instance, that if we had a trade deal going forward, that will be negotiated and will be under the aegis of the European Court, for instance?
No, that's just simply not the case. Any trade deal with any country, whether the EU or anyone else, would always have in it a set of institutions that do dispute resolution, where you can arbitrate decisions between the two parties. Those are normally formed of joint committees. That's exactly what both the implementation period specifies, and that would be subject to a future negotiation. But crucially, this is the point. This deal allows us to have an independent trade policy, which is something that those of us who believe in Brexit are delighted that it does.
Another thing that he discussed is the question of no deal. Nicky Morgan, your cabinet colleague, said that no deal was going to be off the table and it would not be in the manifesto for the Conservative Party. Is no deal now off the table?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the manifesto specifically, but what I would say is the Prime Minister spent all this time and energy negotiating a deal, which, by the way, nobody thought he could do, which he's done.
Sounds like it is off the table.
And that's the deal that we will put in place and deliver if we're elected with a majority. But again, we can only do that if we have a majority to deliver it in what I hope is a matter of weeks.
Is no deal off the table?
We've got a deal. Our job and very much our commitment to the British people is we want to deliver that deal. We've been trying hard to deliver that deal in Parliament, and that's why we're having this election, so we can deliver it by the end of January.
Should it be an option going forward under a Conservative government to leave without a deal?
I think, look, the Conservative government has been very clear. We've negotiated this deal. We have a deal that delivers on Brexit, as I said, delivers on what people want Brexit to do. And then once we get on to that, we will talk about our future trading relationship, which will be a strong free trade relationship, which, again, Nigel Farage was talking about. That's what the political declaration says. It's a different political declaration to what Theresa May negotiated. It provides for a free trade agreement to follow the transition, and that's what we'll be focused on delivering.
It sounds like the short answer to my question is that no deal is now off the table, but let's move on to the deal itself. because that is going to be central to this election campaign. How are you going to model, and when are you going to model the economic effects of the deal that Boris Johnson has negotiated?
Well, obviously, you can't model a deal that hasn't yet been negotiated. Of course.
Theresa May did.
Of course. Well, actually, no, what happened there was a set of scenarios for a range of outcomes.
Well, we have a scenario, and we have a range of outcomes. I'm asking, are you going to model the economic effect of the deal that Boris Johnson has negotiated?
Well, there is already an impact assessment for the withdrawal agreement. That's the deal that's been negotiated. But when it comes to the future relationship, which is, I think, what you're talking about, Andrew, it's when you get to that and when you negotiate it, of course, that would be modelled as you would expect, and Parliament would be updated. There are a set of scenarios that are out there already. You know, what we're
you're not going to do any more work or publish any more work about this, because that means we're heading into, effectively, a blind election economically. We have no idea whether this deal is going to make us a lot poorer, a bit poorer, the same, or a little bit better off, or whatever. We just don't know.
No. Well, we have every confidence that the economy is in a very strong place to start with. If you look at whether it's employment, wages, the rate of economic growth, the foundations of the economy are very strong. This deal, by voting it through, would end uncertainty, which would be very positive for business confidence and investment, something that the Governor of the Bank of England said at the time that the deal was negotiated. And of course, when it comes to a future relationship, you can look to the political declaration for our aspirations there.
And
it's
lick
very
your finger
clear
in the air and stick it in the...
No. Free trade deals like that, which will be deep and comprehensive, which will reduce tariffs, reduce quotas, ensure that goods can move back and forth seamlessly, you know, that is self-evidently good for our economic prospects. And on top of that, the ability to strike new trade deals around the world, to cut prices on goods that we import, all of that will be good for British shoppers and British consumers.
If I may say so, bland, or important, but bland aspirations the rest of us have to take on trust. We don't know, and we won't know anywhere through this election. What we do know is how much you're spending as a party, or proposing to spend. So far, you've spent £5 billion on ending the benefits freeze and raising the state pension. That was announced this morning. £2.7 billion for 6 NHS trusts, 25 billion for new infrastructure spending, 5 billion for broadband, 750 million for new police officers, 7.1 billion schools, and the campaign hasn't even got going. You have already spent, roughly speaking, the extra spending that you attacked the Labour Party for at the last general election as ill-disciplined and irresponsible. You've already done it.
No, I don't think that's true.
It is true.
Well, no, hang on. Coming into this year, if you look at the last set of numbers that we have for the economy for the year that's finished, borrowing was down to its lowest level as percentage of GDP in almost 20 years. And remember where we started from. When we came into office, borrowing £150 billion, £1 in every 4 that we were spending. So to get down to that level last year is, I think, an enormous achievement, and means that the economy now is in a very strong footing to invest in people's priorities. And thank you for mentioning police and the NHS and schools. Those are our priorities, as well as investing in infrastructure to provide opportunity everywhere.
You're spending money like water, as Labour was proposing to do in the last election. You attacked them for that, and now you're doing the same. The difference is that you're also going to promise tax cuts.
No, hang on. We've just did a spending round, which was those priorities that you listed, and we had £26 billion of headroom under the OBR forecasts that were published in March, and that spending round was conducted at 13 and a bit billion pounds, so well within the headroom that was there in the existing set of forecasts from the OBR, showing our sensible fiscal management. And so I dispute the idea that that's happening. And going forward, what you can expect from us...
Don't listen, Rishi, to Andrew Marr. Don't listen to Andrew Marr. Listen to the IFS. Listen to Paul Johnson. He says, in many cases, the Conservative governments of Mrs May and Mr Johnson moved policy decisively in the direction Labour had been planning. You're going to run a left-of-centre economic campaign in this election campaign.
No, I think what you'll see in our manifesto is that it will be fully costed, and with that you will see, as you would expect from a Conservative government, a Conservative party, responsible economic management. So that's what you can expect. I think that is in contrast. So hang on, and you mentioned Paul Johnson. Paul Johnson also said, when we had this conversation last time around in 2017, that taxes under the Labour Party would rise to the highest level in peacetime history, and that they would be paid for by all of us, all ordinary taxpayers. So now that we're mentioning Paul Johnson...
Well, let's mention him yet again, because you mentioned the police. An extra 20,000 police to replace the 20,000 police you got rid of earlier. He says the worst thing to do is to sack 20,000 police and then recruit them again. It's incredibly inefficient and expensive. It is completely incompetent, really, isn't it, to do that?
Well, no, I think you have to remember where we started from. In 2010, as I said, borrowing £150 billion, deficit was 10% of GDP. It was the largest we'd had in generations. It was important that we took action to restore public finances to a sustainable place. That's what the journey we've been on. Now that we're in that place, we can invest in people's priorities. But you talk about police, it's not just about numbers. It's just not just about numbers, though. It's important. People want to feel safe in their communities. So it's also about stop and search, which the Prime Minister is very, very clear we should use properly. It's about reviewing sentences so that people who have committed crimes serve the time that they should. It's about improving security in prison. So it's an approach to law and order, which I think is what, at least my constituents and what many people around the country want us to see.
Moving on, we're at the beginning of an election campaign. The Intelligence and Security Committee of the House of Commons committed a report on Russian interference during the referendum campaign in 2016 and during the last election campaign. It's sitting in number 10. It's been legaled. When will it be published?
Well, I'm obviously not privy to the National Security Council information, but what is typical for reports like this...
It's a committee of MPs.
Yeah, but what is typical for reports like this is, given the sensitive nature of what they talk about, they tend to go through a process which takes several weeks on average, I'm led to believe, and that's what's happening here, and the committee are fully informed of that process. And
Dominic Grieve, who's chair of the committee, says it should be published now. We need to know if there's any Russian interference going on at the moment as we are taking part in this election. If you delay it beyond the election date, people will be very, very suspicious and angry.
Well, these reports contain sensitive information. It's right that they go through the appropriate security vetting. As I said, that tends to take several weeks. I think the report was only received a couple of weeks ago, so I know that process is underway and the committee are engaged in that.
You can commit that it will be published before polling day.
I'm not in a position to do that, but what I can say, it's important that it's appropriately vetted, given the sensitive nature that these reports contain.
OK, Rishi Sunak, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.